talk about the ayahuasca thing, or?
Well, let's finish this abortion thing.
Okay. So
let me just go over it real quick again.
Yeah.
So, a lot of the pro-lifers' argument is that, well, a lot of the pro-choicers' argument is it's an unconscious bundle of cells, and without the capability of consciousness. And then some pro-lifers' argument against that, like Ben Shapiro, is that when we are under heavy anesthesia, we care. We still care if we are killed, even though we're not conscious. But that argument doesn't hold because we aren't the one. When you're under heavy anesthesia, you don't care. There is no one there. It's a choice that the consciousness of the past made that you don't want to, that you want to come out on the other side of that anesthesia. It's not a choice that your unconscious, that your lack of consciousness makes. That's impossible. And so, and we've decided that's okay, that's it would be immoral to go against the wishes of the consciousness that came before and the consciousness that will come after. Now, with a fetus, it's not like that. There was no consciousness before. And some pro-lifers' argument would then be, well, left alone to its own devices, it would become conscious. But that argument also doesn't hold because we live in a mechanical universe. So a million different things every day left alone to their own devices could have resulted in some child somewhere. So if I made this decision, I would be here. If I made another decision in that moment, I would be here with 10 kids. So if I made the decision that brought me here, does that mean I killed 10 kids? And some people say, well, no, that's not the same, but it is the same, because the universe would have played out in exactly that way. So and I think that's a major component of the argument I'm trying to make. And someone like Ben Shapiro, who believes in free will, he thinks free will is a concept that can hold water. I think that because of that, he couldn't follow my argument all the way through. Because as soon as I bring in the mechanical universe aspect of it, he would fall off. He'd be like, well, no, that's not how it is. But I mean, even with free will, well, no, because free will messes it all up. Because then you could say, you could say, well, it could go, we could go anywhere, the universe could go anywhere at any time. Like, literally, at any moment, the universe could people could make 100 decisions that couldn't be accounted for and take us in a whole different direction. Like, instead of saying, well, if I would have made this decision, this is how the universe would have played out. When you throw free will into the mix, you can't say that. Because you could say, well, no, because if I made this decision, it's still, the future is still open. Because even if you had made that decision, you could have, there isn't any set way the universe would have played out. So you could have made other decisions, and you know what I mean? But regardless, that's just not how. People that believe that we have free will, I think that they just don't, they don't have big enough imagination. They're not thinking about it hard enough. But that argument against abortion just doesn't hold. That it is something that will become conscious. Just because it's something that will become conscious, that concept holds no moral significance. Just because something will, blob of cells will become conscious. Like, that doesn't mean anything. You could see, like I said, you can say that about anything, and some people would be like, well, you're taking it too far. Well, you're not, because by saying that because something will become conscious and stopping it and preventing it from becoming conscious that was never conscious before is immoral, then you have to take that as far as it goes. If you're going to hold that as a moral truth, then you have to take it as far as it goes. And now you're like saying crazy stuff like, oh, well, you can't whatever, not eat this food because that food would one day be turned into energy and added to the body, and then those cells would be broken down and used to build a kid. And so one day those atoms, those quarks and gluons would one day become conscious. Like just because some quarks and gluons are going to become conscious sometime in the future doesn't mean anything. Doesn't mean that you can't prevent that from happening. There's nothing immoral about that. And that's what the whole pro-life argument stands on.
Yeah, and that'd be the only thing they could stand on, right? Because the whole argument of when something is conscious is no longer.
That's the only intellectual argument they stand on. Yeah. Another major pillar that a lot of pro-lifers stand on is the soul enters the fetus at the moment of conception. But intellectually, that's just woo-woo. That doesn't mean anything. But that's a tough one. That one you can't argue against, because those people are, they're not gonna. That's just not gonna happen. So, but when you cut those people out, there are a lot of intelligent people that are trying to argue intellectually for pro-life, and it just doesn't hold weight in my eyes.
Yeah. And what's their thing against marijuana? Because I actually haven't come across those ones.
Well, Shapiro, I'm not sure. I forget what Crowder's was. It was something like it's a drug, basically. Like, it makes people lazy or something like that. But even if that was true, you should have the right to put whatever you want in your body. And the lazy thing, that's not even true. Like, it's I think there is an aspect of and it's not even laziness. It makes you you don't want to do what you don't want to do, and I think that cannabis brings that out in people. So it's not that they're lazy. They're just like, man, I don't want to do that. Like, life is short. Why? I don't want to do that. So why would I do that? And I think that maybe there is some aspect of like a lack of motivation, but I think it's more my view on, and the reason that I don't smoke any longer is because I think cannabis is great for enjoying the level you're on, but it is horrible for me for getting to the next level. Yeah. So if you're on your level and you have a routine and you know what you got to do and you just got to do it, then cannabis is excellent. Like, if you have a job that it maybe requires some creativity, and you have you're making enough money and you have like a life that you enjoy, then cannabis is great. You smoke and you know what you have to do. Just boom, boom, boom. Here we go. Go to work, do my job, do this, spend time with my family or whatever, make sure I set some time aside for like hobbies that I enjoy. Cannabis can be infused throughout all of that. But when you're trying to advance, it requires a different train of thought that for me cannabis isn't good for. It doesn't help me with. It actually hinders me. So like and the perfect analogy or metaphor for what I'm trying to explain here is, if you have been at a job for a year, you could smoke and do that job, most likely. Like if you're a smoker, you could smoke and do that job. Like of course if you're not a smoker, you're going to get so high that you're going to be essentially retarded. But if you're a smoker, you could smoke and do that job. Now if you have an interview for that job, you're not going to smoke, even if you are a smoker. That's just a bad idea. Like you don't want to be high for that, right? And that same dynamic can be extrapolated to your entire life. So when you're in the interview stage of your life, don't smoke. Once you have the job, go ahead, you know? So I'm just at a point in my life where smoking is just not going to help me.
Yeah.
I'd love to get to a point where it would. I'd love to get to a point where maybe I finish that book and I actually get it published and I'm like kind of doing okay, and maybe I'm trying to write another. Well, at that point, I'm already kind of there, and I'm in the mode now. So now cannabis is going to help me, you know? That anxiety, that financial anxiety is off my back. You know, I can kind of enjoy it and relax. I got this other project now that I'm working on. I know I can do it because of the first project is doing okay. So now I can really get into it and like use the cannabis for that creative aspect and that relaxing aspect.
Yeah.
But until I'm there, it's just not for me.
Yeah, I can see what you mean with the whole. Because for me, cannabis has for the most part been like a novelty. I never smoked it enough to get used to it. So any experience I do have with it just
is intense.
Yeah. I'm always retarded when I'm on that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, there's some people that only do it that way on purpose, but they're in that next level, but they still don't do it every day. And it's only a once in a while thing where it's like, okay, I'm going to have this experience now. And because they're in that level, they can really enjoy it, even if it turns bad, because they know they're okay in all other aspects. And that gives them armor to other forms of anxiety that can slip through. You know, it gives them resilience. Resilience in other aspects of your life can shield you and barricade you from the holes in that armor that maybe you haven't dealt with yet. And at that point, I mean, if you're successful and you're still getting anxiety from a cannabis high, then it's going to be something personal, like in something you're insecure about or something, like, you know what I mean? Because regardless of what people say, if you get anxiety from a psychedelic or psychotropic experience, it's because of something. And even if it's totally warranted and normal, it is because of something, right? Like if somebody had no issues at all, and we can seg right into your recent ayahuasca experience, but if you literally were just perfectly zen, then none of that would have bothered you, right? Because I mean, unless it's like physically discomforting, right? That because you're at a point where it's just whatever. You're okay. You know what I mean? Like, even if you're just going to spiral out of control into insanity, you're fine with it. You know what I mean? And so I think that, and that's an extreme example, but with cannabis, it's usually not so intense. Like, you're just like, oh, I feel awkward, or you know what I mean? Like something like that. And someone who is in perfect social health, no matter how much cannabis they smoke, the feeling of awkwardness isn't going to come on. They might be feeling something else or whatever, some other insecurity, but they're not going to feel awkward. Like, that's just not going to be a part of it, because there's no that armor is so strong that there's no weak point for that anxiety of awkwardness to pierce.
Yeah, that's an interesting thought. This is I mean, I'm sure this is all stuff that you've experienced and that you've seen other people go through and shit.
Absolutely. I mean, I used to be like that. Like, there was a sweet spot in my life where I was impenetrable when it came to psychedelics. Like, no matter the amount, no matter the intensity, no matter the environment, I was just was impervious. What's the word? Imperturbable. I was immovable, and it was because I was just so content with myself, with my life, with my friends. As long as I had those things, nothing else bothered me. And so any which way that something would try to come at me in those experiences, I was fine with. Like, that it was just like, oh, okay, that's cool. Like, that's whatever, you know, no matter what it was. So, like, even if and on the flip side of that, and some of my worst times in my life, doing something that I just potentially, possibly think someone else could perceive as me, like, doing something even minutely, like, weird or awkward, would totally bowl me over if I was high on weed. If I just smoked a joint or something. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so I've experienced both sides of that, you know? And I think now I've gotten better than where I was, but I've never gotten back to that sweet spot. And and I've analyzed this a million times over, because, like, this is so telling to me in regards to the rest of my life. Like, what did I lose that was there? And what I've come up with was the anxiety of the future was non-existent at that point in my life. Like, it's not that I thought, I knew things were just going to work out, you know? Like, I didn't have any plans, really. Like, I thought I'll go to college and get a degree of something and whatever, but, like, I thought, the type of person I am, something's going to happen. Like, it's going to work out somehow. Like, someone like me doesn't just, like, come up empty-handed at the end of it all. But as time went on, and as I fell into darker and darker places and dug myself a deeper and deeper hole, especially with opioid addiction, I started to realize that that's not, like, there was no reason to be so sure. You know, like, it's so easy for everything to not work out. In fact, it's far more likely that especially where I was then, that this is just all gonna like go to shit, and the rest of my life is gonna be a struggle, and there's never going to be a light at the end of the tunnel. Like this anxiety, the anxiety of survival, the financial anxiety, the anxiety of wasted time, in regards to menial jobs and things of that nature. That anxiety might never be resolved, and I like, as that became more and more real to me, then the armor that I had been wearing became like more and more elusive. You know, like it became transparent. You know, like it was, because it was only a state of mind before. Like really, it wasn't like there was nothing about my life at the time that was tangibly, that I could look at tangibly and say, that's why I'm not anxious. You know, where some people have that, where like, here's my bank account statement. That's why I'm not anxious, because I'm fine, you know. I didn't even have that back then. It was just a mental state where I like projected this armor on me, and because of how powerful that projection was, it functioned as if it was real. But as I came to see that it wasn't, then that projection just collapsed on itself, and so I was no longer able to use it. But like my whole, and the reason why that became so important to me, that whole the whole sequence of events that led to all of this, was the reason why it was so important to me is because it kind of gave me the goal of like getting that armor for real. You know, like, and still to this day, that's my goal, is to like, to be able to, like, I know because I've been there before, where if that anxiety is lifted, whether through real progress or just a better state of mind, which I think real progress is the only option at this point, because I just know too much to go back to that naivete that I had. You know, like the ignorance is bliss thing is so real. It's so real, and you can't, like, ignorance. The path from ignorance to informed is one way. You know, it's something you really can't retrace, like unless you like go get electroshock therapy or something. Like you can't walk that back, and so the only option that's left is real progress.
I wonder about that mind state you had back then, because I remember there was a time, and this is when you were talking heavily about the Buddhist practices, where you were kind of like not caring about what physical things you had to attain. Do you remember that? Like,
I do, but I'm still there now. It's not about obtaining material wealth. It's about eliminating the anxiety of potential poverty in a way. So it's not about gaining. It's just about so it's not about gaining. It's about not worrying about losing. So it's not like I want a ton of stuff. I just want to know that I'll be okay without doing something that at the end of my life I'll regret.
Yeah. That's interesting. And I'm sure you have some plans of going about doing that now, like
More so than in the past 5 years. That's for sure.
you feel pretty good about the progress you've made.
I feel good that progress has been made.
Yeah.
Maybe not so much like the exact amount, but I do feel good that there has been progress made.
I also want to know, like, so what are your thoughts on like people who? Well, what are your thoughts on like maybe a monk that like seems to have nothing, and what's the progress? There's obviously like spiritual, mental progress made there.
Yeah, definitely. And they kind of found a secret passageway to it. So, if you think about it, they still don't have that anxiety. They just went about it a different way. So, it's not that like like they're living with nothing and like they're living. It's not that they're living in poverty. Like they've just lowered the standards and like moved to certain places where the standards are lowered as far as like survival needs, to where they no longer have to worry about it. So then they can focus on being okay with living a life that's like that. So they don't have to worry. Like they know they have a place to live. They know they are going to have food. You know, they know they'll have food. They know they'll have shelter. They know they'll have water. So like those things are taken care of. Mm-hmm. And so that anxiety is gone. And then when it comes to the desire for more, that's the whole point of them being there, is to eradicate, is the work to eradicate that. Right? And so I still think that they're taking the like they're taking the most courageous leap, you know? But the problem with it is that so much of those like that philosophy and those techniques and those ideals have been lost and twisted over time, that there's so many places where I would argue that they're really just wasting their life. Like they're just spending their whole life in a monastery, not making any real progress, and then just like dying at the end of it, thinking they're just gonna reincarnate to a next life, and not really having had that many great experiences, right? Now I do think that there are some that like they do read like correctly into the old Buddhist texts, and they do devote themselves to practice, and in doing so, they come out where they're happier than we could ever be, and it's totally worth it for them, right? And I think those people are I think those people are like some of the most courageous people in the world, you know? Like we should truly like admire them.
Yeah,
you know?
The courageous part is the action of taking on that kind of lifestyle.
Exactly. Exactly. Because but to be fair, it's still it's taking on that lifestyle, because it's not guaranteed, you know? Like if this is the only life we get, which like most likely it is, if no one can really say, right? But given what we know, most likely it is. This is it. Like once you die, that's it.
Yeah.
And because of that, depending on who you are and the mind you were given and all the variables that come into play, I'm sure there are plenty of people that have had the courage to make that move and still didn't get it, and were practicing correctly and all of that, but still didn't get anywhere with it because their mind just wasn't really fit for it, right? And so even though they can come out, some people can come out feeling or living a life that's filled with as little suffering as possible. It doesn't really, it's not about that being a better way, like it's just a life with as little suffering as possible. So if you're more about, I want to have as many experiences as possible, then that's great too. You know what I mean? Like the whole thing is that you're okay at the end with what you've done. Yeah. Like that's the whole thing, is that that you get to a point before you like that's the best you can really hope for, is that before you die, you get to a point where you're like, okay, I'm okay with dying. Because like most people aren't blessed with like that last moment in the hospital bed where they can be like, okay, like I'm about to die, here we go. Like most people die like some other way where it's like they don't really get to think about it. And so the most you can really hope for is that at some point before that, you're like, this was good. Like, I'm not sure where I'm gonna go, but this was pretty good. Like I'm glad that I did this. I'm glad I did this. That's the most that you. That's what the goal should be. And it's insane how difficult that is. That's insanely difficult.
Yeah, it makes me think about like how often people feel that within their lives, and maybe if that plays into that ending part when they do finally like feel like, oh yeah, this is worth it, like you were just saying.
But that ending part, like I said, most people don't get that like nice ending. Like it's usually, so it has to be sometime before that,
Yeah, that's true.
And most people don't, like the way that the world is now, most people don't think about it like that.
Yeah.
They just go through, like just moving on to the next, and all of a sudden it's over. Like you should really want to get to a point where like you can like stop and be like, and it's not the fault of anyone. Like we unfortunately live in a world where most people are doing things they don't want to do for the majority of their time, and they just don't have time to stop and like think and like really do things that would bring them to that like revelation of, yeah, this is good.
Yeah. That makes me wonder if you think it's possible to have that mind state on any level. You think at a certain level you're only able to reach that?
Yeah, I think that there's definitely a level. I don't think it's as high as some people might think. Like I think we're on that level. So if that gives you some type of reference, I think that there's levels like so far above that are just like that would be like that. It would be nice to be at that level, but you can't. Unfortunately, you can't really choose.
Yeah.
So you gotta kind of figure out how to be okay with the one that you've been given. and even that is easier. Like I don't ever think about that. Like really, like if not as far as like wishing you were in a different situation or something like that. It's more about I wish I was in the same situation, but like again, without that anxiety. You know what I mean? So
With some of these other
yeah,
methods.
yeah. So it's more so like, because there are people that are like, man, I just wish I had a totally different life. You know, I wish I was a different person. You know, and that's taken it to, that's tragic. You know,
Mm-hmm.
that sucks for those people. But and I think that even if you're in that mode of thinking, there's certainly a way out. But I think people would be surprised at how little they thought that way if things did get better for them, you know?
Yeah.
Like, if all of a sudden they didn't have that anxiety anymore of the future and of wasting time.
Yeah, I imagine some kind of personal context is usually the way that people are able to get out of that. Like, context by itself, people always try to throw that at other people. Like, imagine.
There's people worse than you, basic type of thing?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's usually the context that they live through.
Yeah.
Like, they get some, I don't know, insight from this little peek at
Right. I
how
mean,
good they actually have it.
it does help. It does help.
Yeah.
You know, like, I was actually talking about it recently about like homeless people and seeing them sometimes. I think that like
Oh, that's your little personal context.
like I'm actually doing pretty good.
Yeah.
You know, like that's rough. And I have a situation where when I see something like that, I can actually make it even more personal by reflecting it back to where I was 5 years ago, you know? And it was at such a worse point that it can't but make me feel
Yeah. Mm.
better,
Oh, okay.
you know?
Oh, yeah. I get what you're saying. Yeah. That's dope.
So that definitely helps, but even so, it's kind of that thing of worth after the fact. It's a worth after the fact. So it's a value after the fact, and I'll explain that a bit. When you're in the moment, when you're in it, you're like, this is rough, you know, like this is a struggle. Like, is this going to get better, or is this going to get worse, or you know what I mean? Am I ever going to make it? Am I going to figure this out? But if you do, all that stuff before becomes elevated because that's what led you there, right? And so in that moment, and everything before that moment, it looks dismal until you climb out. And then it's like when you're climbing a mountain and it's like, okay, this part sucks, this part sucks, this part sucks, this part sucks, this part sucks. Then you get to the peak, and when you look down, you're like, man, that part was awesome. That was that part I got over that, and like that's that part that I got over. That's an awesome part. Like, that's a good part. When up until that last step to the peak, you would look down and be like, that was fucking horrible. That was horrible. That was horrible. You know, like, this is horrible, you know? But then you get up and you're like, no, those were the best. That was the best parts.
Yeah.
Like, that's what got me here, you know? And so it's kind of like, it's like like an elevated hindsight,
Yeah.
you know?
It sounds like at the previous points you weren't far enough away to have a reference point. Like 2 inches doesn't look like shit compared to like a mile away.
Yes, but it's not just about. It's not just about. Yeah, I guess you're right. Really. Because even if it doesn't happen, like, say you don't reach the peak and your whole life is just climbing the mountain. No, see, that's the thing. You have to reach the peak. Because even if your whole life is climbing the mountain, if you don't reach the peak, you can look down, and even if those points are still far away, it's not about it. It's just, I guess you could say that though, because even though it's the reference point is far enough away in time, it's not far enough away in the distance between struggle and success.
Yeah.
So I guess you are right. Like it's that reference point between struggle and success that makes all the difference.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to get at.
Yeah.
Just, the struggle looks all the same when
Yes.
you're making minimal progress.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
That's interesting. I was gonna ask about. Do you feel like that's usually? Do you feel like that's usually only possible for people who have like have some kind of personal context to reference? Like, say there's somebody who maybe hasn't
Had the struggle.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think. I think
you have to have some kind of struggle to be able to appreciate.
Yeah, and it's not just struggle either. It's struggle without the knowledge of its end. So, I hear wealthier people say it sometimes. I've heard Joe Rogan say it before, where he's like, I want my daughters to like have struggle in their lives, because I think you need struggle, and I think that's great that he thinks that, because he's totally right. But unfortunately, they'll never have that. Like, no matter what they put themselves through, or like, because like what he was talking about was like doing things like, this for an example, like doing a wilderness hunt where you have to like live off the land and this and that, like, and that does work. That's better than nothing, but it's really not the same as a struggle where, say, their plane went down in the wilderness and they don't know if they're gonna make it out. Like, there's a difference between, like, even if you were a millionaire and you decided, I'm gonna live homeless for a couple of years and just like survive, the knowledge that there is an end, that there is a safety net, it takes away from the struggle's power. Like, it takes away all of its power. Imagine if me and you knew that in 5 years we would each get $10 million. Yeah. There would be no more struggle. Like, even though we still have to figure it out the next 5 years, even 5 years, 10 years, doesn't matter what it is, the struggle would be gone.
Yeah.
It loses all of its power. The knowledge of the struggle's end, the lack of knowledge of the struggle's end is all of its power. It's all of the struggle's power. And that's what I think someone who experienced that lack of knowledge of a struggle's end will always be happier when the struggle is over than the person who started at the top of the mountain and was always there. They always have the potential for more happiness. But the difference is, there's still like even though I believe that with all my heart, it still would be hard to choose where I would want to be, because the person that started at the top knows he's always going to be there. The person that is going through the struggle doesn't know if they're like, that's the whole thing. Like the main thing that gives the struggle its power, that makes it better once you get over it, is the reason it has its power is the same reason why it is so, like, this, the reason why it's so terrifying, and the reason why you're so happy, you're happier than anyone who never had gone through that, is because they're the same reason. It's because there's a chance there is no end. That lack of knowledge of the struggle's end, is because there might not be one. That's where the terror comes in. You know, like, the reason that gives the struggle its power is because you don't know if there is one.
Yeah.
Like, it's not like a lack of knowledge about its end, where it's like, oh, well, I don't know when it's going to end, but it's going to, or, you know, I don't know how it's going to end, but it's going to. It's that you don't know if it's going to end.
Yeah. That's an interesting thing, because it makes me think about how it reminds me of the ayahuasca trip, because going into it, and even the month leading into it, just the whole time, I was looking forward to it.
Yeah.
And taking it too, and during the trip too, like the discomfort and everything I was sharing.
Yeah. The intensity of it.
Yeah. Was coupled with, like, it wasn't a thought, but, like, it was like an underlying feeling, a very faint underlying feeling of, like, that all I'd have to do is just outlast this.
Right.
Like, the whole time. I remember at the beginning of the trip too, the reason for me referencing my watch was, okay, I just have to
get through it,
outlast the supposed 6 hours or whatever.
You knew there was an end.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, and I think that also played through the whole trip. Like, even as I was going through, like, the whole, that cyclic suffering or whatever.
That
like,
was your thread.
Yeah, that may have been the thread. It was also very faint, but it, like, as I was going through it, I was like, oh shit, this is fucking crazy. And you could see it in the video.
Yeah.
Like, I was looking like the straight exorcist and whatever, but even through that, like, there was, like, some kind of comfortability, and I was like I was getting tossed in a fucking washer or whatever in my mind.
It was a war.
Yeah, and I was just like, I'm gonna be cool.
You will be okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that was also, like, habitual, like, how through the whole time I was constantly checking my points to the point of habit, where my body just did it automatically without my mind remembering why I was doing it in the first place.
Right.
I would even go so far as to theorize that maybe just the whole, alright, all I have to do is outlast this, that feeling became, like, just the underlying habit that I became comfortable with.
Yeah.
And just kind of, like, outlined the whole trip.
Yeah.
Through the whole suffering. And I wonder if well, it actually makes me wonder a whole bunch of other shit, but just that part of it, of the suffering and how well you handle it, just made me think about that part and relate it back to the ayahuasca trip, because, like, as crazy as
overwhelming.
as overwhelming as it was, and even when I'm describing it, I don't feel like I'm doing it any justice when I'm describing it, because, like, I feel like I make it sound horrible, but like it was really like an experience that you really can't get out in the real world without like some shit like that.
You know, it's funny. The most like ayahuasca trip reports that I've heard, whether it be on YouTube or on podcasts or something, I've heard that exact phrase multiple times.
Which one?
I know I'm making it sound horrible, but, and like just that, like not the rest, but that I've heard over and over, which is funny because like that's just the way, like that, it seems to be just the way ayahuasca is.
Yeah.
You know, like that's just, it's not like you had an unusual trip. Like when it comes to ayahuasca, that's just how it is. Like it's just, it puts you through war, you know, it puts you through a battle, and like you gotta like fight your way to the other side, you know. And it's interesting because I keep reflecting it back to like at least and just for the, like, if there's people listening, the moments we're really talking about like are the points where it became so overwhelming that you almost, it was like the way that that I described it was, it becomes so overwhelming that you couldn't handle another second of it, but you had to, type of thing, right?
Yeah.
And then it was only, it's, so those are really the point, that's really the moments we're talking about right now, not the before and not the after.
Yeah, the discomfort.
Yes, yeah. And it keeps reminding me of the opioid withdrawal and how I felt that way, where it's like I mentally can't take another second of this, and yet you do. You know, like
you have no choice.
There's and I've gone through it a couple times, but a couple times way worse than the other times, and it was this in that sense that you couldn't take another moment, and the moments keep ticking on. It dug into my brain, like it made me feel like I was going crazy, because I knew I couldn't take any more, and yet it was going on, you know, like I kept knowing that I couldn't take another second, and another second would go by, you know, over and over and over again, and
it's interesting, like you're almost waiting for like some huge release.
Yes, like just
maybe your brain to explode.
Yeah.
Would have relieved you better than whatever life was giving you, which was just living through it anyways.
Yeah, and one of the main things is, you know, because there's all sorts of little home remedies for opioid withdrawal, but there's really only one thing. There's only two things that are going to help you. Either opiates, which the whole point you're going through it is to stop taking them, so that's not an option unless you fail at going through it. And time. Those are the only two things. And so if you've settled on not taking opiates, then you've essentially settled on time. Like, that's what I'm going to do. Like, I just have to, like, time, I have to get through a certain amount of time. And it's interesting though that you had that faint sense of like, I know it's going to be okay, because just knowing what that sense is like from the experiences I've had going through opioid withdrawal, I know that it really doesn't do much heavy lifting, because great, it's going to be over eventually, but I need it to be over now. You know what I mean? Like, that's kind of like, at least for me, like it never did much heavy lifting. Like, it was a like, maybe it kept me off the edge, but no more than that.
Yeah.
Because even if it was, I mean, I guess with you, it did probably a little more heavy lift. Well, no, because I was gonna say it may have done a little more because for you it's a couple hours, where with opioid withdrawal you're talking about a couple days. So like it really doesn't help much, you know, and it's not like in those couple days all of a sudden a switch goes off and you're back to normal. It's just slowly getting better the whole time. And with you, it's much more rapid and like it's in a tighter time frame. But when you're having a psychedelic experience, time really doesn't really matter that much. So like even knowing like I know this is going to be over in exactly 2 hours, that probably in those most uncomfortable moments, that knowledge probably didn't do much heavy lifting for you.
When I was going through the discomfort?
Yeah.
I like for the emotions I was feeling immediately in it. Yeah, no, because like I said, it was just like a light, like a light feeling underlying.
Yeah.
Like it was there.
You never really thought about it.
Yeah, but I never really. Yeah, exactly. I never really thought about it. It was there, and as I was like seeing all this crazy shit, like points would flash in my brain, like something would help me remember.
Yeah.
That this is a trip. And like I said to you earlier, like my brain wouldn't be able to hold memories long enough to reference them and build off of that and get myself back to a more stable position. Anytime something made me remember that I'm in a trip, it would get overwhelmed by the emotion again,
right?
By sensations. And so in terms of like that doing any kind of thing for me, it didn't. I was more like experiencing the whole thing, like holy shit, this thing, it's like throwing me for a loop, like it's crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was like a psychedelic black hole.
I would like describe it more like that was in a washing machine. Yeah, like a conscious washing machine. Like anything that you could think to experience was getting shifted in and out of my perception.
It's
like sight.
It was cleansing you.
Emotion, any kind of physical feeling, like any part of that I was able to sense was like getting shifted in and out, and that shit was crazy. Like that was crazy in itself because it was very discomforting, but also nothing I had ever experienced.
Right.
I think there's the brain can only focus on one thing at a time. Is that right?
Generally, it can only,
if you're consciously focusing on something, it's only one thing at a time.
Well,
but it can do like other things.
There's your narrow awareness, and you have a periphery awareness as well. So you can only focus your narrow awareness, which is like your like laser beam of like analysis, like in the forefront of your conscious mind, like boom, this is it. But it's not like, so like right now you're listening to my voice, but if something were to happen over here real quick, you would notice and you would turn and look. Because it's still being processed. Like you still are aware of this side of the room, but you're focusing on my voice. But you can only focus on one thing at a time with your narrow awareness, and that thing could be complex. It could be an integrated. It always is. It's always an integrated experience. So like right now you're focusing on me talking. So it's me. It's the sound. It's it's everything. But yeah, it is. It's only one thing at a time. But it's not like you're taking all those things in separately. I mean, you are taking all those things in separately, but your awareness is only experiencing it as a single integrated experience.
Yeah.
So you can only focus narrowly on a single integrated experience at a time.
Yeah. That does kind of like explain the trip, the cyclic part of the trip, because it was that like whatever I was able to focus on, wherever my eyes were focused, or wherever my brain was focused, if my eyes were closed, like it just kept shifting, and that little bit where like you said, if something happens to this part of the room, I would look, and my attention would get drawn to that. That was essentially what that whole trip was like. Every little thing would draw my attention, and it was doing it rapidly. I think I had mentioned it as like a spotlight awareness or focus.
Yeah.
And like super spotlight, like it would be overwhelming.
Yeah.
But it would shift so quick, like it was all overwhelming.
Awareness is described as a spotlight by a ton of Buddhist teachers.
Yeah.
Like that's a very common analogy, metaphor that they use as a spotlight. What it is they say mindfulness. Mindfulness is the spotlight, or mindfulness is the light that illuminates experience for what it is, right? Concentration, these are two different skills. Concentration is what narrows that illumination into a single point. So you can use mindfulness for just all your current intake of sensory experience, right? And be mindful of it. But concentration allows you to take that mindfulness and focus it on a single point without allowing your mind to drag you from sensory experience to sensory experience. So I imagine that someone that is highly adept at concentrative practices, meditative practices, may have been able to kind of harness that experience and choose, at least, I mean, not that me, I don't know if it would have helped, but at least choose where they wanted it to be without that cycle, and just burn a hole into it.
That's what I was thinking.
You know, like just deep analysis of it.
Yeah.
That's
exactly what I was thinking, because that's where I was failing, and also at the same time consciously being aware that I was failing at it.
And you know what's interesting? The Buddhist texts talk about these great awakening experiences where you combine high levels of mindfulness and high levels of concentration that you've developed either individually or in tandem. There's different practices that do both, that do one, that do the other, but developed high levels of this mindfulness and concentration, and we're able to focus in on what they call the three marks of existence. That's the impermanence, dissatisfaction, and no self, the lack of self, of all things. All things are impermanent. All things are unsatisfying. Yeah. So all things are impermanent. All things are unsatisfying, and all things are selfless, are without a self. And so you could take those two skills and you combine them, and you turn that spotlight that you've now. So if concentration is a laser, and mindfulness is just a
Just
a light bulb,
Yeah.
then you combine it into a spotlight and you shine it on those three marks of existence, and it burns a hole into them. It allows you to dig deeper and deeper into the very into the very mechanics of their operation, of what they mean, the very mechanics of their meaning. And this is supposed to bring about an awakening experience. And I've always wondered, because you don't often hear that people go through this, right? So like even those that have spent their lives building up these two skills and combining them together, you often I mean, it's almost never. Like every once in a while, like, and they say that it's because that people that are so beyond that they don't say it, like if someone reaches awakening, they don't tell anybody because they just don't care to, right? Because they're beyond that now. But even so, like I don't know. And I've just always wondered, like I know that the mind is crazy, and if you increase those skills to like a level of insanity that we can't even understand, and you do that and you focus on those things and you really dig deep, there could be like a breakthrough experience. I can see that. But I always wondered, because the old Vedic texts talk about a drug called soma. And recently they started theorizing that soma is actually it's the Ayahuasca theory. That soma was actually just another word for a version of ayahuasca that they took in like the India, Afghanistan, ancient India, ancient Afghanistan regions back when the Hindus and Buddhists were around. And I always wondered if maybe what actually happened with the Buddha was, or maybe not him exactly, but people like him, was that they sharpened those two tools to a fucking point, like just high level skills in those in mindfulness and concentration. And then they took ayahuasca, and it was the investigation of those three marks of existence with those two highly sharpened tools combined while tripping on DMT.
Oh, yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
So that like gave them the extra like power like boost to like really blow a hole through those concepts, and like really change their change like the very like structure of their minds permanent, for the rest of their lives. Like they finally like understand impermanence, dissatisfaction, and the lack of self to a point where like they just let go, like nothing lasts, nothing is ever truly satisfying, and there isn't anyone here to worry about it. Like there's no real self here to worry about it, and it's just like poof, they just let go. So
That's an interesting thing to think about.
isn't it? Like I always wondered, if maybe that's what like ayahuasca was used for back then. Like where we know it from down in South America, that was more like they were more religious. Like, and I know people say, well, Buddhists are religious too, but like, I mean religious like they thought they were like talking to the gods, The Buddhists weren't about that, they were about the mind. So that something like ayahuasca would have been perfect for them, like they weren't trying to talk to gods. They were just trying to like do self-psychology or something, you know what I mean, some type of introspective psychology
Yeah.
on themselves, you know.
It's interesting. Also, another thought I just remembered right now about the trip was how much my brain was working. You had mentioned this too in the text, how some people will get mentally tired um, for a few days. I feel like the most similar feeling I can recall from the trip was just how much my brain was processing during the moment, and it was intersecting with the thought of like how my brain was working, because the thought of like how I was only able to focus on one thing at a time was in my mind as I was going through the cyclic nature of everything. It was intersecting with how much I was processing.
Yeah. You know, they've done brain scan studies on people on ayahuasca, and the frontal lobe is just glowing like no other time. Like every single like neuron is just on fire, you know, like everything all at once is just and our conscious awareness can only do so much. Like even though all of that was going on in your mind, your conscious experience of it is limited. So of course it was like unlike anything you've ever experienced, but you couldn't ever really experience the true nature of what was going on there. Like, you know what I mean? Like you couldn't ever really experience what was actually happening in your mind, because our conscious bandwidth isn't big enough. You know, it's not wide enough. So you can't fit all that in.
Yeah.
You know, and it's like I said about comprehension being like a black box. You know, it's like all of that was behind the scenes.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. Another thought I had about it was as much as I was processing in those moments, another thought came to mind was that I wasn't gaining anything new aside from the experience of like the discomfort giving me some
insight into suffering.
Into suffering.
Hey, that's insight into one of the 3 marks.
Yeah, and I'm sure if I was to get back into that again, I'd probably investigate that feeling more. But for the most part, I didn't. The thought came up during the trip was that I wasn't really getting anything new.
Right.
Yeah. It was more references to things that I already knew. So when I had gotten into the point of like making connections into how things were connected to everything, it's talks that we already have.
Right.
So just like when we talk about why certain things are the way they are, like I don't know, the gender differences or why men do what they do, like on the last talk.
Right.
And the underlying structures of how that affects society as a whole and what we're viewing on the news and all that. And it plays through my mind in this trip, and I'm just like, these are things that this is kind of like a review.
Yeah.
As I'm going through all of it, like it's cool, and I'm actually getting like kind of a visual as I'm going through them, because the visual is more hard to describe than the feeling and understanding of what I'm seeing. But it's cool in itself because it's giving me a visual of how it's connecting. But other than that, it's like the feeling I'm getting as I'm seeing it all connect.
You feel the connection.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And I'm seeing it and I'm feeling it and I'm going, oh, okay. I couldn't see it before, but now I'm like visually seeing it.
Yeah.
There's a visual for it. okay, this shit I knew already.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah. And that was intersecting with the whole thought of how much information I was processing, because uh, that was leading into, I have all this information in my brain, but it's only referencing itself. It's stuff I already know.
Right. Yeah.
There's nothing new coming in
Beaming in.
and giving me new insight to more shit. It's
Right.
just like stuff I know already, kind of maybe lighting up more simultaneously than they have before.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that.
That's probably why the whole trip of feeling like things are connected starts making its way into the trip, because if I'm to take what you're saying with the whole the frontal lobe lighting up,
Right.
and my feeling on the trip of how like my brain is processing so much, it's everything that I know, or everything that my brain can remember, being brought to the forefront simultaneously, and having the logic that usually runs through them connect all of it.
Right. Yeah. Logic on overload.
Yeah, and so like, and it's just kind of like how my brain works, being brought to my eyes and kind of just like shown right there, like,
Yeah.
oh yeah, this is everything I know already.
Yeah.
That's probably the reason why I have that feeling of, oh, there's nothing new here, because it's everything I know, just right in front of me.
Yeah. That's why I think that it would be good. I think that you've probably gotten the most you can out of DMT for a while. And I think that it wouldn't be worth it for you to have a psychedelic experience again until, at least until you can try something like LSD. Because as I said, LSD, at least in my experience, it allows you to have so much more control and insight into like the conceptual framework of your mind. You're able to move things around and build these and I've said this to you before, but I'll just say it again for those listening. But with something like DMT and ayahuasca, the frameworks that you build in your mind on DMT and ayahuasca are they're in the ether. They're in a place where they can't translate back. They can't translate back into everyday life, and especially if it's something you already knew, like you're just seeing it all connected and all of that. But besides maybe telling you like, oh, okay, like I have that right, it's not, like you said, it's not adding anything more to it.
Yeah.
But with LSD, you can build entirely new structures with these concepts, and it's as if you have, it's as if your brain lights up like it does on DMT, but only the sections that you want and only when you want them to. So you can, you're not overwhelmed by it. Now I'm sure if you took a high enough dose, of course you would be. But if you just take a hit or two, even just one, just to get the idea of what I'm talking about, you have far more control over the change in your thought process, and so you can do real work with it. Real psychological work, real conceptual work that translates over into your sober perception. So the insights that I've had on LSD are the way that I process information even today.
Yeah.
It entirely carries back over. So I now perceive certain things in the same way that I first perceived them in those LSD trips. And I think that it's far more useful in that way. And I've always gotten the sense that ayahuasca is more about the experience, the struggle through it, that's the type of insight that you get. It is that insight into, and it's not just from you. I've heard this over and over again. Suffering and control. Over and over again I've heard that. Suffering and control, suffering and control. You know, struggle and control. It's really what it has to offer, you know, is insights into suffering and into control. I think that LSD is just more malleable. You have far more options of as far as insights go, and you can kind of take it. It's kind of a tool. Ayahuasca is more something that takes you over, where LSD is more of a tool that you're given and you're able to use. And like I said, I think psilocybin's somewhere in the middle of those two. And I think psilocybin gives you really profound insights into the lack of self, which is interesting. You know, that feeling of like we are all one type. It's very common. You know, like that there is no there's no self or identity or individual. It's just we're all just one. Like there's no space between me and you. You know, it's just one thing, which I think is really interesting, and worth exploring. But after ayahuasca, I think the next thing should be LSD, and which is good because who knows when that will be.
Yeah.
And so it'll give your brain enough time to rest anyways, you know. And but one thing I did want to ask was when you had mentioned something about when you were first explaining this to me, because this is for those listening, this is last night, right? This is last night that this happened, or no? Is it last night? No, 2 nights ago.
Yeah.
2 nights ago. This is only 2 nights ago, so this is still fresh. But when you were first explaining it to me, you mentioned something about seeing the beginning of like human history.
Yeah.
What did you mean by that?
Well, that was trying to remember, because I was coming out of the cyclic part of the trip, and the thoughts I was having from that led into the human history part of the trip.
Yeah.
The thoughts being the suffering I had just experienced, the discomfort, and also the cyclic nature of it. Those whatever visuals I was getting started to turn into what I was perceiving as like, oh, this is how the growth of human consciousness proceeds.
Mm.
And I think this kind of just leads back into what I was just mentioning earlier about everything that I knew kind of coming to the forefront.
Right.
And just playing itself out visually, because.
But that specifically being able to experience that's different than just knowing it.
Yeah, definitely. Because the experience part, I don't know if it was so much. Maybe I was experiencing it. I would say I was more like at that part, the human history part of it. That part was more like observant.
Right.
Yeah. The most experiential part was the suffering part.
Yeah.
Once I was coming out of that part, the thoughts that came out of that were, oh, this is what suffering is. Oh, this is discomfort. that led into this suffering, and whatever memories were coming to the forefront were also getting melded with those thoughts from the suffering part, and then melding into the human history part, because my brain was kind of like putting those two together and making it like this is how human consciousness grows. Like it's constantly suffering, but that's just how my brain was processing it. Because it has nothing new to be referencing, so it's putting together these concepts I already know. And it's playing this out for me, so I'm observing now.
That's like, real interesting, though.
Yeah.
That's pretty insightful. And real quick, just so for those that know psychedelics and know ayahuasca in particular, just so they can have an idea of how intense it was, your dose was 300 milligrams Harmala extract and 100 milligrams of DMT crystal.
Nice. How much did I pay for that? Was that 120? I paid 120 for that shit?
120 split. That was the dose. That was because it was $60, and I put 2 of those together for you and Gary.
Shit, man, thanks. Yeah, fucking Gary didn't even like do his whole thing like that.
Yeah, well, that's the reason I wanted to mention the dose is because it's a fairly high dose. Like those listening are gonna be like, holy shit.
I mean, I was having this thought too, and I was having it with my roommate, and I mean, I don't know how much our input should be taken as like whatever, but one of her thoughts that kind of stuck with me was like, if you're not going all the way, then you're not really experiencing.
Yeah. Go big or go home type of thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. No,
the whole time, dude. Like from the moment like Gary kept like halving all the stuff he was doing.
Yeah.
I was like, okay, I can understand wanting to share with the other guy, and I was trying to do the same thing too. And even the part when I had just downed the DMT quickly, I was like, I forgot to like leave a little bit for him. But at the same time, I was like,
I want to do this.
Like, yeah.
Well, you know, I understand that sentiment, and I agree with it as far as a one-off. But going forward for things like LSD, there's a point where it's too much. You're just not going to get anything out of it. It's going to kick it. Like say like for LSD, for example, if you take 2 hits, you're going to get a lot out of that experience. If you take 6, you're not. Like it's not something where the more like, I'll get this many insights out of 2, I'll get 3 times as many out of 6. There's a point where your consciousness is just gonna dissolve into just some unexplainable, meaningless thing that you're gonna come back and maybe for one time to be like, I experienced that, but the real work is done down at the 1 or 2 tab level, and some would if I remember correctly, a tab is equivalent to around 100 micrograms, not milligrams, micrograms. And so the 100 to 200 microgram level is where like the real work is done. And some would argue that it's actually less and more frequently. So, there's the people out there that are now microdosing. So they're doing, I think it's like 20 micrograms every 3 days for months and months and, maybe years. And so I think that's one way to go about it. I think that the real deep insights definitely come around the 100, 200, maybe 300 microgram level. And I'm not saying you're not going to get anything out of the 500, 600. Yeah. But I would argue that the real work is done on the lower levels. And when it comes to ayahuasca, because from what you've experienced and what you've described to me, and from what I've read and heard, it seems with ayahuasca it's a different type of animal. And so because it really only offers those two main insights of suffering and control, the increasing of the dose just gives you stronger insights of those two. So I don't because of the nature of those two insights themselves, it isn't something that you lose if you go higher and higher with the dose. You just get a stronger loss of control and a stronger experience of suffering. And again, it's funny because we're making it seem like it's just pure suffering, but it's really not like that. It's overwhelming experience.
Yeah.
It's the discomfort of overwhelming experience.
Yeah, exactly.
It's not like suffering like pain at all.
No.
Like, were you in pain at any point?
No.
Yeah. So it's just it's a different type of thing.
Yeah, and just to go back to what you were saying about like when would be the next time to be trying anything with psychedelics, I think LSD would probably be like the next time, but with what I just experienced on ayahuasca, and this insight you're giving me on like, you know, what parts of the brain are really working, like these all play into my conscious, and like these are thoughts that were playing as I was on ayahuasca. I was like, these are things I know.
Yeah.
And they're all melding into these visuals I'm seeing. And so, aside from the next time being maybe LSD, the next time also, it would probably be like when I've come across new information in general and I work that into my own reasoning and logic.
Right. But if you think about it, after an experience like you've just had, it would only be worth it after you've acquired quite a bit more.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'd have to learn a whole lot more. Like,
so
probably like a whole bunch of more schooling, maybe some more progress made in like the fields of science, and I'm reading about it in the news. Like, I'd have to come across a whole bunch of that where I'm just furthering my understanding of the universe in general, because those are the parts that are gonna start coming back whenever I do get back onto ayahuasca, and then they're gonna like fuse together with whatever sensations I'm having and give me another visual, like, okay, this is what I know and this is how they're all connecting. Like, it's stuff I know already,
right,
but here they are presented in a way that connects all of them.
And you know, there is some evidence that ayahuasca promotes neurogenesis in the brain and promotes new more complex connectivity in the brain. And going back to what we were talking about before this episode started, as far as whether you think it changed you in some type of way, or made you more resilient, or maybe just improved your mind in some way. And you first said that you didn't really think, you couldn't really notice anything, but given what you just said, it seems like there is something.
Well, because the way the question is coming at me, the assumption I'm making is, do I feel like different?
Right.
And I don't feel different. What I experienced was cool. This isn't an experience like I'm gonna constantly be referencing this experience forever.
Right.
In every aspect of my life, like, oh, this shit happened, so
So
have to act like this.
yeah.
Like more so, I would say the time period when I had what I would consider my first breakthrough on the DMT thing
Mm.
was more life changing than this. But at the same time, I haven't given this one enough time yet to sit
That's
down
true.
and really, because the reason why I say the DMT trip receives more of that feeling of life changing for me as opposed to this ayahuasca one is because I'm taking into account all the events that were happening around the same time.
Yeah.
I was having the breakthrough trip. I think I was. There were a few books I was reading at the time. I was also getting acquainted with new concepts, and so it was all of these things that were coming together. And I had talked about this with another old coworker, and I was sharing with her like my life is like crazy right now. Like I'm going through a whole lot of stuff, and it's something that plays back to me even now because these all did culminate into something that is like affecting how I'm acting now.
I was actually going to ask you about that. Well, first, I do think it's something that's worth revisiting in a couple days, and then maybe even longer.
Yeah.
Like a couple months, or just being like, huh, I want like just kind of doing a like a self-analysis, like a quick self-analysis, or like a quick like self-inventory of like, okay, like this is like, if that did do anything, what would it have been? You know what I mean? And see if you can like notice anything, just for the curiosity of it.
Yeah.
And so I think that's worth doing. Because 2 days later is nothing, you know? Like, your brain's still, like, figuring out what the fuck you did to it. You know what I mean? Like, really.
And that's not to say, like, there aren't already, like, things I have attached with it now. Like, it is a memory, but it's also a memory that's attached with, like, things that led up to that memory.
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
I did wait a month to plan for that. There was a bunch of planning I did with you on how to go about doing this, and that became implemented that night.
Right.
I was talking with Gary about it, like how much you and I were planning on like what was supposed to be done, and how it came to fruition on Monday night. And so all of that is like
part of it,
the whole experience too.
Yeah, and so what I was going to ask you was, and it plays into that. It plays into that pretty heavily, but this is more of a general question. Where could you imagine, like are you surprised at like where you are, or like maybe not surprised, but say 2 years ago, if you were to look forward and see like this is your situation, like would you be like, oh shit, didn't expect that?
What's the fun? I'm gonna maybe, because I see what you're getting at with that question, and if I'm to take the question literally, I would probably not answer it in a way that'd be productive.
Why?
Because 2 years ago, I was in Hawaii.
Yeah.
And I was already like going through like a bunch of changes.
Right.
Like the move to LA was huge in itself already.
Yeah.
Like, the moments leading up to the move also were like huge.
Well,
like,
so I don't necessarily mean your situation in life, but personally, cognitively even.
If I thought I'd ever get to this part.
If you'd be like who you are today.
Yeah. You know.
And I guess that's really just to say, like, is it interesting to you, like that this is where it's come? Like, I guess that's really the better question.
Yeah, it is very interesting. It is a thought that I do have a lot because it kind of actually ties back to this conversation we had about like how we perceive our growth. I remember you describing yours as like a pendulum, and not so much a pendulum swinging left and right, but a pendulum over a bowl
Yeah.
of things. It's like swinging in any direction.
Yeah.
And I describe mine as like a tree or a plant or something.
Yeah.
And our explanations were yours, even when it was going to one extreme, it still had a string
Yeah.
connected to the center. And then mine's was I always had my root,
Mm.
even in the present day. I always felt like I was correct, which is the reason why I chose the metaphor of a plant.
Mm.
Because I have had like most of my thoughts on morality and ethics or whatever. Maybe not fully fleshed out.
But the foundation.
Yeah, the foundation was always there, and they may have been growing under like a shade for some time, but the moment like one of my leaves found some sunlight, that's where the plant moved to, was to the sunlight. But it still has its foundation in the same spot.
Right. Right.
And yeah, so going back to the question of like, if I thought I would be experiencing the things that I experience now, no, I didn't think I'd have any of this. I actually, because I was against drinking, I was against like smoking weed.
Substance use in general.
Yeah. I was it, and like I just had like a whole lot of visions of like how I'd see myself. But one of the things that maybe wouldn't surprise the old me was, or one reason why the old me wouldn't be surprised by how I am today was because as much stuff as I was restricting myself from doing, I was always kind of like accepting of a lot of things.
Yeah.
I feel like I can't really recall ever being like super like unable to see things from a different perspective, because I was friends with all kinds of people who were doing things that I had chosen not to do.
Right.
All my friends were doing drugs and drinking.
But you weren't judgmental.
Yeah, I wasn't, not at all. And I was I was actually actively doing that while they were in the midst of all of it.
Yeah.
And the whole thing of like the uncomfortability people would have of being around somebody who was sober while they were all fucked up was also something that played in to the whole thing. But
I
it
was
was
still
something I reveled in, like just like
that you were.
different.
Yeah. I would still argue that there's a big difference between being like a druggy partier and exploring psychedelics.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Yeah, I guess so.
It's really not the same.
It's not. Well, at the same time, because, yeah, I guess so. I guess you're right.
I mean, that's why most partiers aren't taking ayahuasca.
Yeah.
Like psilocybin and LSD, you can, because as I described it, it's more of a tool that you're able to use. You can kind of steer it into the purely recreational use if you wanted to.
And the reason for that recreational use is for pleasure.
Yeah, straight up. You know, and not that there's anything wrong with getting pleasure out of the experience, but it's just you can like the pleasure that I've gotten from like super profound insights is been amazing. You know, like it's more than anything. Like it's more than any pleasure I would have gotten from like taking a psychedelic and just going to like a party or something.
Yeah.
Now something like there are some strange ones like MDMA, where almost like you can, like that's a strange one where you can kind of walk the line perfectly between recreation and exploration, because it's kind of it's you can kind of it's on the same path, you know, like the exploration into like your emotion, into love and friendship. Those concepts can be explored while on it, while doing whatever, you know, like while doing your party type thing.
Yeah.
So that's an interesting one. But I mean,
and I wouldn't even fully dismiss the whole party goers attitude toward drug use, because the people I was hanging out with who did do all those things, granted, it was a whole lot of peer pressure when one person was doing it.
right.
Other people were doing it because they had done it before, but now they could do it around other people who also did it. They also all collectively, in my conversations with them, were trying to get something out of each drug. Like, a lot of it was like comfort.
Yeah.
Or
Relief.
yeah, relief. Also, a lot of it was like exploratory. Like, some of them were taking the drugs way too often for it to be exploratory anymore.
Right.
But that just comes along with being young and dumb.
Yeah. Well, and the drugs, certain of them being addictive.
Yeah.
You know.
Because some of them were like playing with. I think MDMA was the big one that was going around.
Yeah. Well, that's why I'm really talking about psychedelics.
Yeah.
Like, I can see how the other drugs, like, and that's why, like, MDMA kind of walks the line, and then you can go on the other side of it, like, where, I don't know, things like, I'm not sure, really. Like, well, weed, of course, that doesn't even barely count. And then, like, cocaine, like, that can become a serious problem. But I see how some people who do it every once in a while, like, you could be doing both at the same time. Like, I totally see that. But the psychedelics are just one of those things where you don't do them often enough to you don't do them often enough to waste them, to waste the experience.
Yeah.
And if you are doing them often enough where you can just have a throwaway, then you're doing them too often.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, and that, like, I'm sure if ever any of us at the time had gotten our hands on any of those substances that would have, like, given the trips that I've been going through now, like, we would have abused that shit.
Right. Yeah.
Like, we were, like, doing it in groups, and that's just that's confirmation to us. Like,
Yeah.
we've done it, and we've all done it individually. Like,
Yeah.
This is okay. It's no longer an individual thing. It's a communal, societal thing,
And then
we made it all right.
if one person is doing it, then that's confirmation for the rest. And so it just rotates, where it's like, oh, well, he's doing it. And then next time it's like, oh, well, that guy's doing it. And,
And
you know?
it becomes the talk of, like, groups.
Yeah.
Like, hey, did you hear they did it? Like, so where do we go get that? And that's the conversation that plays through everything.
That's when you're real young. That's what, not like real young, but a lot younger.
Well, it's also the mind state, because, dude, like, we were past high school already at this time, dude, and, like, I'm telling you, I had matured late, man. We were 20 something.
No, me too, but I'm talking early 20s. Yeah. Early 20s, for sure. Because at a certain point it kind of switches to just like, it's just like, if I want to do this, I'm just gonna do it. I'm gonna find out where to do it. I'm gonna do it. You know what I mean? It's kind of more like that, unless you really do have a problem. But that's the thing about drugs. Like, there's really not, beside not counting psychedelics, you really don't have a big supply of drugs that I would are safe. Like besides psychedelics, you're just left with a bunch of stuff with huge abuse potentials.
Yeah.
You know?
And I think that's just drugs in general, especially when you have them being put under the extreme like control of like these ones are good to take, these ones are illegal.
Right.
They have certain levels.
Yeah. I would if it was up to me, I would legalize all drugs.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah, that's been like a big thing. I think forever, at least in my mind, that is like a no-brainer. And it kind of leads into the whole, or it relates to my paper I was talking about. It was like, you know, why, if we haven't fully understood something, why are we gonna like outright ban it?
Right. Crime would totally fall off. You know how the massive percentage of crime that is just built on the what's the word? Like just built on the axiom that drugs are illegal.
Yeah.
You know, like literally, they're all built on that foundation.
Yeah, we previously made this wrong, and this is the rule we're following now.
Well, right, and like this is illegal, and so now this is the only way to get it.
Yeah.
Like all the Mexican cartels out of business, they would just collapse on themselves. Like their business is now gone. Like I know there's some like sex trafficking and stuff. I mean, and by some I don't like. I'm sure there's like when you look at the numbers, they're pretty high, but like in relation to everything else, they're not. And so you take away the illegality of drugs, and all of their operations collapse. All of them, like most of the like even in LA, like. The crime in this city alone, like most of it is built on selling drugs. Yeah. You know, if you take that away, what's left? Like I'm sure that there are, like of course there are things that are left, but not enough to sustain them. Like I really wonder what that would do, like how they would respond. Like would it turn worse because they had to find another way, or would it just die out because like people need to survive and now that racket is gone? Yeah. You know.
Imagine like or at least this is how I'm imagining it. I feel like there'd be a movement or like a traffic transferring from that part, like effort on that end, to like a different part. Like it's interesting. I know the energy being put into one thing has to go somewhere else.
And what do you mean by energy? Like the energy of like gangs?
Yeah, like the effort put forth by people who are out there selling weed and shit. But now they have to go and
the driving force though is profit.
Yeah, and so it's gonna go into something else. And if you take into account everything that they know about going about doing that, so the person who is selling drugs, what do they know? Well, once you take away their source of income, you start playing around with what are some other avenues they might take now.
Well, you'd hope
go about surviving.
You'd hope it would be into a less violent, legal space.
It's an interesting thing to think about. Like,
what
are some potential ways that they go about spending their time now to survive? The resume of a drug dealer. What does that get you?
Yeah. Well, it would be, I don't know, it would be very strange to see because there's a lot of problems. Like, it's not really a resume, so, like, they'd have to, like, they'd be in this place where, like, they really don't have anything that could really get them, and there's just so many, like, they have to go back to school, and maybe some of them wouldn't, but most of them would if they wanted to like get jobs in marketing or sales or something. Maybe they could get into sales, but even if they do, they're not going to be making money like they're used to.
Yeah.
So like that's going to be a problem. And I don't know, honestly. I don't know. I would like to see some type of study that showed like the economic effect of
Shutting down that whole.
yeah. Well, first of all, just the economic effect of it being in place. Like how many people are living off of those types of profits, right? So how many people, like say you just made drugs illegal, all of a sudden tomorrow they are, right? Big business is going to swoop in right away and start like offering like selling them. You know what I mean? Like
And
trying
they
like
have the power to like provide whatever the consumer
right.
would want.
Yeah, absolutely. And first of all, they're going to get it anyway. So it's not like we would all of a sudden have a scourge of drug addicts. Like the scourge would still be there. Like the scourge of drug addicts has nothing to do with the availability of drugs. Nothing. Like the opioid epidemic, nothing to do with the availability. That's why they keep going after prescription opioids. That's not the problem. That was never the problem. It was clearly never the problem when those were gone and everyone turned to heroin. The problem is that the void that people are being raised with in this like vicious I don't want to say capitalistic, but it's whatever capitalism in this country has evolved into. It's something else now. Capitalism, like on its own, with good actors and people without too much power, is all right. You're always gonna have some people you lose. Always gonna have some people that win, but it's now evolved into an oligarchy.
Of whatever the society has on these people that's making them addicts.
That's making them want to turn. That's making them want to turn to something else, something to pacify them, like something to give them relief from the harsh reality of their life, and it goes full circle back to what we were talking about before with that anxiety. That anxiety of envisioning the rest of your life and how you're going to be doing something that it's not just doing something. For a lot of people, it's not just doing something that you don't want to do. It's doing something that you hate for more time than you're not for the rest of your life. So for more time in your life, it outweighs the time that you're doing something you hate outweighs the time that you're doing something that you don't hate, let alone that you like doing, right? And that realization, it drives people to some type of relief from it. And that's what's causing the opioid epidemic. It's not the availability of opioids. Yes, if you somehow could get rid of all opioids, then there wouldn't be an opioid epidemic. So that would be a viable solution if it was even remotely possible, and it's not. You can crack down with the force of the entire U.S. government with 50 billion, is as much of a budget as the military has. You could get rid of the military and just do the anti-opioid organization. Yeah, the war on opioids. And it still wouldn't work. Like, it's just, people have been doing this for too long. Like, the drug business, the illegal drug business is too big. It just can't be beaten. Anytime you take someone else slips in. There's too many people that are in positions of poverty that want to make a come up. No matter how dangerous the game gets, the prospect of profits that big is too enticing. The same reason that people are doing drugs is the same reason that people are selling them. And until you solve that problem, there's nothing that is going to stop this from getting worse.
You know, this brings me to a thought I had, and it's gonna go into a few more thoughts, and it'll probably round out this thing nicely because we are getting into like the 3 hour mark, I think.
Okay.
Was it fentanyl? Fentanyl?
Yeah, fentanyl.
Did you take that?
Yeah.
That shit is like super potent.
Unbelievably. But when I did it, like it's being laced in heroin.
Oh.
When I did it, I got the pure fentanyl gel packets. And like that would you'd stick on, like it was made to stick on your arm as a transdermal patch. And it was for people that are either dying of cancer or basically their spine was broken in half. And it was like it was prescribed for breakthrough pain. Breakthrough pain is where you're either dying of cancer or you have some issue, and the pain is so intense that they have you on 200 milligrams of Oxycontin and there's still pain breaking through. And so they give you these for the breakthrough pain. And so we would get these patches and we would cut the gel packages. It was filled with pure fentanyl gel. And we would cut them open, squeeze them out onto tinfoil and like smoke them, like heat the tinfoil up until it evaporated and have a straw there waiting. And
shit.
That shit was next level.
Supposed to be super potent, right? Like if you take too much,
you're gonna die.
Yeah.
It's the strongest thing that I've ever done in my life.
I was reading it off that article that you had sent, the guy who did that really good piece on.
Yes, Andrew Sullivan.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Made me want to do some fentanyl.
Dude, that's one thing I would never encourage you to do.
I think it was the part where the guy was getting resuscitated back to life and pissed at the
Yeah, I've seen that.
And that was the part where I was like, damn, that sounds like a bad.
Hey, yo, to be honest with you, that's real. And not only is that real, but back when I was deep in it, if you heard of an OD, you would immediately try to get the dealer's number that they had went to, because you know that if they died off of it, it must be strong. And it was that same mindset, you know? And to be clear, that Andrew Sullivan article is amazing.
Yeah.
But this is what I've been saying forever. Yeah. I've been because I know what it does for you, right? I know what that drug does for you. It offers you something that very few things in this world offer you. Complete and total relief from that unsatisfactoriness of life. Complete and utter relief from it. And you never notice, and this is why it's so addictive, not just physically, because it's highly addictive physically, but this is why it's so addictive mentally, is because you never noticed how much suffering you are in until it's totally gone. And then you never want to go back.
Yeah.
You know? And so it's a powerful, powerful thing. It's a powerful, powerful substance. And there was a time where I had bought like 200 of those things, because this was years ago, back before they were so sought after, you know? And that was the first time I ever went through opioid withdrawal, was after I went through all those patches. And I had it in my head that I just wasn't gonna, that I just wasn't an addict. I couldn't go through withdrawal. I would know if I was getting to the point where I would, you know? But that's how it happens. You keep doing it, when I don't do it, I'm not going through withdrawal. And then you go on a long enough run, and then you're stuck, you're trapped. The only way out is either through the withdrawal, which until you're like so dead set on it that like you would rather die than do that drug again, which is a hard thing to get to, given how good it feels and given how bad you have to feel to get off of it. Once you're in there, you're stuck between going through that intense discomfort of opioid withdrawal, or just keep continuing to go back to it. So, but I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, that's you didn't interrupt me. It just makes it sound all the more enticing.
Yo,
I'm an idiot
that's
when I
one
say that shit.
that's one thing I would actively try and prevent you from trying.
Yeah.
Like anything else, like I'm a try it once type of person about almost everything. But that's the one thing that like the consequences, not, and I don't even see you being like an addictive person, but it's the type of thing that it provides. It does not discriminate. It doesn't discriminate.
Yeah.
Like no matter who you are, like it gets. You'll find people of all walks of life that have come under its hold. That's come under its grasp. But I think that there's a way out of this, and we just have to start. There's a way out of it, and we have to start providing people with sober alternatives to that same relief. And for the longest time, I didn't think they existed, but they do. Like, they do. It's just that in this world and what it's becoming, they're so hard to find. And like the alternatives are conversations like this, like, real friendship, like real love, real experiences, like that are becoming less and less valued in our culture, with social media and like real connection, back to Rat Park, real connection. That's the cure to this, and it's totally possible. I mean, what finally got me off of it was realizing that everything that this gave me was not better than what I could get, and that what I could get was actually possible. And most people in the world we live in today, that they don't have that. Like, they just think, like, either they think there's nothing better than this, so this is what I'm going to stick with, or they think maybe there is, but I'll never obtain it, right? And so that's what this is like. And the only way that comes is not that, like, I think that rehab and treatment, there's a lot we could work on as a society, but I think that that's where the money should be going, not not the the DEA, but and it's not just something. This is not just a cure that I'm offering for opioid addiction. It's everyone. It has, not I say everyone, but so many people have that void that I've been talking about and Andrew Sullivan wrote about so eloquently. It's just that some people find opioids and they happen to be one of the most destructive things that you can fill that void with. But people do it with everything else, like anything else you could think of that's like unhealthy.
The most like minuscule shit.
But yeah, exactly. And even if it's not affecting them too terribly in a negative way, they're missing out on what's really worth experiencing in life, which is, at least for me, like these types of conversations, learning, exploring experience, connecting with other human beings, And like I said, as that's being devalued, we're seeing the consequences of that, you know? But
almost like you planned this ending.
well, it's better than the depressing ones we've been having, so.
Well, I think we can end up on that note. Any other last words?
I think that'll do it.
Cool. All right, well, peace.
Later. Thank you for listening. We hope you enjoyed it, and we hope to continue bringing you content.
And if you'd like to support us, you can find us on patreon.com/thepseudointellectuals or on Twitter @thepseudoint.